Okay. Well, good afternoon, everyone. We're glad to see it's standing room only today. Yes. My name is Danielle Knapp, and I am a recent graduate of John F. Kennedy University, a museum studies graduate, and I did my thesis on dams and museums, where we are and where we go from here, which is how we got to today's session. Our panelists just relentlessly answered all my emails and phone calls and did my surveys. I'm sure some of you did my surveys for my thesis as well. So before we get started, I'd like to say thank you, panelists, and I'd like to introduce you all. So first we have Deb Wythe from the Brooklyn Museum, and she's the head of digital collections and services. Then we have Nick Honeysett. He is the chief executive officer at the Balboa Park Online Collaborative, and of course, Layna White, of course, who is the head of collections and information access at the San Francisco Museum of Modern Art. So thank you all for coming today. I hope you're ready for a lot of questions. So the goal of this session is to talk about all the current landscapes of dams and museums, specifically discussing some key factors that I found in my thesis, which I will touch lightly on because we are on a time constraint. We're only going to talk about 10 minutes each. And then the panelists are going to present their dams. They're going to talk about the original need for their dams at their institution, the problems they were trying to or attempting to solve, and then the barriers they encountered along the way, and the lessons they've learned. And then we'll open it up for questions with whatever time we have left. So, also, I'm presenting at CAM in March, so I am not going to go into deep detail, so you can come see that presentation, or my thesis is available online for anyone to view at any time at JFK University on their library page under Museum Studies Master's Projects. So, this was my thesis, and my methodologies were very simple. I used three: an in-depth literature review, mostly for-profit literature, and an online survey, which I'm sure most of you got an email about through MCM or the Image Muse. I had 50 respondents, and then through those surveys, I got 14 people to talk to me for about an hour each, which was fabulous. We all know that a dams can increase work efficiency, eliminate the need to recreate lost assets, and for museums, it can really be amazing for tracking usage rights and avoiding fees and incorrect use for license violations. But we have to remember that dams were originally created for for-profit companies, large global companies using it for branding. So why are museums considering dams? When I asked this in my survey, 85% of the survey respondents said to enable their staff to more easily access information. 73% said to enhance workflows, and then 73% said to minimize duplicates of assets. And of course, to secure our digital assets into one place, because we have them scattered throughout our server with only certain people knowing how they store their assets. It's going to make it easier to find them. When I asked in the survey how long a dam implementation was taking each museum, it was about 2 years or less was the majority of the responses that I got. And then for each department, how many are going to be using the dam? More than 50% had all or many departments using the dams, which was very impressive. Only about a little more than 30% had a few or one department using their dams. And then I asked, is it an effective dam for your workflow? If you have a dams and you use it, is it actually working? 79% said it was effective for their workflow. So then I asked, did it improve your workflow? You have to use it. You might have to be forced to use the dams, so it's effective because you're using it no matter what. But did it improve that workflow? 74% said that it did. So that was impressive. And then I asked, how often are museum professionals using their dams throughout the day? Was the most responses, about 65%, and then just very few responses after that. So clearly the people taking my survey are probably people using a dams regularly or putting it together. But it is nice to see that most people use it every day. So I asked, would you recommend dams to other institutions, because it is costly, it is time consuming, and I wanted to see what the response would be, and an overwhelming majority said that they would. So that was very exciting. So what is the main problem for dams in museums? What are museums trying to solve with dams? And it was very simple. It was a unanimous answer from my interviewees, and it was access. But access can mean a lot of things. So what types of access were my interviewees talking about? They were specifically talking about internal and external access. Internal access for their staff, for their image tracking, their licensing, and their security. And then, of course, they're external, because we are mission-driven institutions. So you wanted online access for your staff, and you also wanted public access through the online. So we're trying to help fulfill our missions a little bit more. So to understand access needs in a museum, there were 10 main things that were brought up through the interviewees. I'm only going to talk about 5 because we want to keep this short. And that was having your key stakeholders at the table when you're creating this new dam system. Taking a digital asset inventory is essential, and understanding how people store their digital assets, where they're storing it, and how many copies they are for backups. And then evaluating how staff uses those assets in their day-to-day operations. And then to understand your current workflows and the issues with your current workflows that you're going to try and solve, which just seems very, of course, like that makes sense. But putting this into practice and getting everyone at the table and changing work culture is difficult when you're going to change how everyone does their job. So the next problem with this whole scenario of putting dams together within a museum is that there is not one really solid information base. Information scattered, and everyone's kind of looking all over the place for information. I know MCM has a dam SIG, but for the most part, all my interviewees said, it's really scattered where I find my information about vendors and what a dams is. And then the information is typically geared towards for-profit companies, not nonprofit companies, and we have a little bit different of a mission drive. We're not as monetarily driven, we're more mission driven. And then the information is out of date quickly. So a lot of the institutions I talked to were quite large, and I talked to a lot of very small institutions that were doing this on their own. So everybody had their different idea of what was available to them according to their size. So the dam problem that we're going to solve is talking about our dams together, because museums have different types of dams, and we want to make sure that we can see how someone uses it versus how we might create our own dam for our institution. So we're trying to not reinvent the wheel, which was something that a majority of my interviewees talked about. So the game is on. You guys are up. They're going to talk about their need for their dams, and then the problems they were trying to solve with it, and any barriers they came up against and lessons learned. And then once we're done with that, you guys can ask them as many questions as you want. So thank you.
So now we'll go to Brooklyn. Wake up. Hello. Or not. Come on. No. Yeah. All right. Okay. You just have to have that special Mac touch. So we're going to talk about holistic dam building in Brooklyn, and I came up with that term because I really don't like enterprise feels corporate, even though that's what most people use. Our vision was to create something that was effective for all potential uses and not limited to a single department or function. And we're going to look at the landscape as it was in 2005, which is sort of when we started thinking about dams. I think this is probably typical of most institutions. There were images all over the place. They lived where they were created or needed. They replicated all over the place. So it was quite a bit of a mess. The scope of the problem, in 2000, we had started creating digital images. So once digital hit, there was just an explosion. Everybody could duplicate things, but if there wasn't one place where you could find them, you salted them away wherever you could do that. So we needed some new management techniques. At that time, I was the museum archivist. We had hit a critical mass of images where we weren't able to, we felt that we needed we needed a better way to manage things. So I brought people to the table. There were many departments that were stakeholders, so I asked the departments that had the strongest stakes, the photo studio, rights and reproductions, marketing, libraries and archives, obviously, technology. So we got together, the archive staff did research on possible vendors that might work, and we brought them in for demos, and we had this team of about 10 people coming to watch these demos. At that point, the administration, we had a new deputy director who was quite interested in this, and he proposed the idea of a new department to deal with this. At which point, it became clear, to me at least, that it was really important to talk to everyone. And I was really, in the keynote this morning, I was just so charmed by the fact that she said, we need to talk to people and empower them, because that's exactly what we were trying to do. So I went to every department, sat down with the key stakeholders in each department and asked them these questions. And took notes, put them all in a spreadsheet, and just ran that through a word cloud program, and this is what we got. Just huge amounts of concern about images, about TMS, about photography, and you can see in there things like problems and demand and timing and so forth. So I learned a lot from people about what they wanted. So at that point, we looked at a new organizational structure. I was told to create this new department, which became Digital Collections and Services, or the Digital Lab. This was a no new staff, no new money reorganization. So we stole 2 people from archives. We moved in on the photo studio, which used to be under conservation. We took 1 person from rights and reproductions. We had an open position from education, so we ended up being 5 or 6 people. Part of the goal was to purchase a DAMS, but the key thing was we were going to streamline and improve the creation, management, and use of images. In other words, our mission was to get rid of the log jams at the museum. So this is a before and after schematic of where the people came from and what the current staffing of the digital collections department is. And the ones that have stars were existing, but then you can see we've added some new functions, because those functions were being done, either not being done, as in copyright clearance, or they were dispersed around the museum. So picture research for catalogs was done in whatever department was working on a catalog. It was totally inefficient. And we invented the Wikipedia seeding project, and candid photography we're working on. So where did the money come from? Well, luckily, at that time we had a huge costume documentation project, and we were expecting 25,000 new images over the period of a couple of years, which not only gave us the money to buy the dams and the scripting that was needed, but it also gave us the impetus. Well, what are we going to do with those 25,000 images? So, so between 2005 and 2009, we were able to gear up and actually get the dams. We signed a contract. Pause. We had problems with the vendor. There were some things that the vendor wasn't entirely true about. So we had to break that contract. It took about a year, but it was actually a good year because it gave us a chance to go through the whole network and organize everything and work out our metadata. So by the time we signed the second contract in 2007, we had 32,000 images ready to load, which I did on weekends with multiple machines running and just was pouring them in 500 at a time. This is the way the systems work now. Everything that we create in the way of images goes into our dams, everything except for candids. We're sort of ready to deal with that, but there's some steps I still need to take. Everything goes into the dams. The images go to TMS overnight. Data from TMS comes back into the dams, so all the objects have TMS data. So it acts as kind of a proto TMS for people who don't have TMS access. Images from Luna and TMS go out to the website every night. If anybody needs images and data, there's an API on the website so it can go out to the world. The library OPAC is not linked. I wish it were. That's a project that maybe when we get critical mass with library materials, we'll be able to convince someone to do some scripting. Or if we get a new DAMS, that makes it easier. This is where we are. Everybody on staff has the DAMs on their desktop. Staff who need TIFFs have access to them. They can download them. I already said everything goes 2 directions into TMS. A really important thing is that rights information, which we have in the TMS rights and reproductions module, drives our website behavior, and it's also visible on the dams. So anybody on staff who needs to use images has access to that information, so that they should be able to tell if this is something where we've cleared copyright. Digital Lab staff does all the data and image loads mainly just to keep it consistent, keep it clean. We're pushing 175,000 images. Candids are on deck. As soon as we find a way to pour them in, we'll do that. So, lessons learned. It's not just the software. You can probably find software that will do what you need, but you need to listen and you need to serve all of your staff, not just the photo studio or not just the rights and reproductions department. Be very collaborative. I believe in sharing the wealth, that we need to get our images and our data out to everyone, both staff who need it every day and also to the website and to places like Wikipedia. Don't get overwhelmed. Do it a little bit at a time. If somebody gives you lemons, like our bad contract, make lemonade, and then make sure you are very detail oriented. And the final thing is be prepared to change. As I saw some hands go up, your dams won't last forever. We're sort of at the point where we're starting to look at what's the next big solution. When we bought our initial dams, we knew that it would do maybe 80% of what we needed, and we knew we would have to upgrade at some point. So that's probably my next big project. That's it. Thank you.
2 seconds. So you're gonna see some common themes when I talk, and I'm gonna talk about some kind of higher level kind of policy and process issues as well. A dam in the park. So Balboa Park, clever, huh? Building a case for digital asset management is a real challenge. I found this great quote from Chris Durkin, director of Tate Modern. We really have to start considering a museum like a mass medium, but we still don't know how it really functions and what the rules and the laws are. And there are many laws and rules around digital asset management. It beggars belief that we're having to kind of convince institutions who are in this kind of rich media, visual industry that there needs to be a compelling argument for digital asset management, and it's not about a single person who's responsible in the institution for doing it. You need frameworks, and this stuff is hard. It takes a lot of time, and it takes a lot of people, and it's expensive. Right? Do you like that? If you're managing and retrieving assets based on institutional memory, you have a really big problem. You got to get the people out of it. We've had massive turnover where I am, and that is massively a huge problem in digital asset. Even when you've got a system in place, having knowledge of that asset management system is a challenge when people rotate off. There are a lot of dams. I was talking to somebody yesterday who's on looking to bring in a dams, and he said he had reviewed 80 different digital asset management systems. He should charge his time. Some of them are expensive. The whole open source thing, don't be fooled by that. It's as free as a free puppy. Lots of picking up shite. So it's all about, they're all expensive. There's nothing, if you don't spend it up front, you're going to spend it down the line. You got to understand the total cost of ownership of this thing, and it is significant. And it should be, because we're in these institutions where rich visual media is our business. It should not be cheap. It's effective digital management is really hard work. And don't forget that dams are frameworks. A good dam is a framework, and it's going to require constant attention, morphing, developing, tweaking it for the needs that you had. Deborah said, I've talked about getting 80% of the way there, which is right. Atelophobia, I came across this word, the fear of not being good enough. Getting a digital asset management system, actually any application into an institution is a compromise. And the people who think it's going to solve 100% of the problems are in for tears before bedtime. So this is what I'm dealing with, and I'm hoping for some sympathy with the crowd. Balboa Park, 27 cultural institutions. We have everything except an aquarium, I think. Or we do have a koi pond. Maybe that's close enough. So right now, we have 8 institutions that are on. We use Piction. Are there actually any dams vendors here? Great, we can talk about them. Excellent.
It's being recorded.
Oh, damn. Scratch that. Cover. So 8 institutions are in this system. Each is individually kind of has access to their own instance of Piction, and then those all roll up into a Commons, which is providing images under Creative Commons license. That's a kind of a discrete website on our setup. And that's also an instance of Piction. So we have 3 instances of Piction in museums, and then 1 instance that's providing access, which is kind of outside the firewall. We have current count's about 350,000 assets in there, and about only 20 of those are accessible, and that's purely on a licensing protocol. But here's what I'm really dealing with. So every year we have 4,000 performances and films. There are 150,000, I've just done an inventory, this is why it's in my head, 150,000 volumes in the research libraries in the park, 700,000 collection objects, 5.5 million photographs, 7 million specimens, and 120 million historic documents. Sympathy?
Yeah.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Over 130 million things that we got to deal with, and I haven't even got to the video stuff yet. I mean, we have plenty of video in there, as Pyrian will attest, but we still don't know how much video is in there, in the park. So, figuring out where all your assets are is a real challenge. If you don't have an asset management in your system right now, guarantee all that stuff is everywhere. That takes a massive amount of time to figure out and consolidate and figure out what's the master and what's the derivative. Challenge is conveying the value of digital asset management, like I said, even now, which is crazy. People are useless at dealing with scale, and that's really what you're dealing with here. If you've got a few hundreds of assets, thousands, you can't have people dealing with that stuff. And I loved Claire Beckman's quote at the Ignite talk last night, where she said, "Assets don't arrange themselves." It's like spot on. Dam selection, you got to really define the problem. If you don't define the problem, there's no way you're going to get a matched solution. So spend a lot of time on figuring out what that is. The instance that we have in the park, I've been in the park a year and a half. The asset management system infrastructure has been there maybe 3-4 years, 5. Yes.
2011.
Yeah. And so I believe we have real challenges with it. And I believe the focus of the project was wrong, which was about building a commons rather than stepping back and saying, what's the business requirements of the institutions? How do they want to manage their assets? And then get that out there. So it was too specific. It was about just, this discrete presentation of these assets rather than this much broader solution that we were trying to find. And I think primarily it was about having a commons is a fantastic thing to put on your grant proposal to IMLS. It's many institutions have got grants based on that. This is really important, and this is probably my biggest problem in the park. Adoption and use depends on utility and functionality. We have, and Danny had a graph about people in it every day. The institutions that are in their asset management system every day, they love it. The people who are in there once a month think it is the devil's spawn because they can't figure out how to use it. You need long-term planning. You really got to figure out what an asset management system means to your institution, and it's about as quickly as you can operation. Well, you can read it. Support and process. Figuring out how you're going to support this thing ongoing and what all those processes are. Operationalize. Thank you. Constant training. In my head, I had this model of an escalator. Every time, there's turnover, you just got to be in this mode of constantly bringing people up to speed, whether they're users or technical people in the environment. Escalator is your model. So because I think defining the problem is the most important thing, I just wanted to share with you my massive challenge, which is this project I'm calling Lost in Balboa Park, which is to create this kind of Spotify framework of all that 130 million things. It's going to take me decades or centuries maybe. But just, an experience with collection content and cultural content in this kind of Spotify discovery connection world. I have this concept of playlists, and I'll quickly show you. This is a Harry Potter one, and so you're going to appreciate why I'm showing you this based on my next slide. But we're just trying to figure out how to create these more interesting views, facets of collection objects and trails that turn into tours around the park. So if you're familiar with Harry Potter, some of you may be, we're linking Harry Potter to a whole bunch of collection objects in the system. In the museums and the cultural objects. So serendipity is what we're after, and I found this fantastic quote which is absolutely about digital asset management and figuring out when everything is connected to everything else, everything matters. It's like, and this is why I showed you that. Sing it with me. Whoa, If you like it, put some metadata on it. I came across, there's a company in, so I've got this 130 million things. I've got a meta tag with about 300 different tags. And then I came across this company called Clarify, a couple of PhD students who've come up with this online, submit an image and we'll tag it for you. So the first one we did was this picture of this El Greco of St. Peter, and this is what it came back with. And I was like, Heavenly Chorus, this is the solution. Then we put some contemporary art and the thing just kind of failed miserably. So in summary, this is what I think you should be focusing on. Assets, not just images. That was a mistake we made. You've got to think about, I didn't even cover all the internal kind of administrative assets that you're also going to want to manage as part of an asset management system. Truly understand your problem and spend a lot of time figuring that out. Really focus hard on policies and procedures, and Deb, you talked about that. Understand the audience, internal and external. People are going to be using this every day. You've got to make it a really elegant experience, and then put some metadata on it. The top link is to this presentation, and then there are two kind of detailed papers written by Rich Cherry, I think they both are, with so those bit.ly links. I thank you very much.
Okay, well, change is afoot at SF MoMA. We have a new building that's going to be opening next May. We have new photo studios. We have new staff. We have new cameras. We have a new website. We have a new dams. And so like Brooklyn, we got our first dam. Well, maybe unlike Brooklyn, we got our first dam, but we got our first dam in 2006. That was dam number 1. And earlier this year, we rolled out to staff our second dam, dam number 2, and we bid a long goodbye to dam number 1. So we're in a really good place right now to reflect on, does having a dam make a difference? And does it deliver on expectations? So just to kind of give you an idea about how we're using our dams today, it kind of gets at the needs, and I think more importantly, how we aspire to use it.
So right now, our digital asset management system is the common place for us to put, to explain, to find assets. Why? So that we can use assets, right? So right now, we use our dam to help answer or to explore questions. And so my slides are really examples of the things that staff have searched our dams for in the last couple of weeks. So you'll see search terms, and you'll see some of the assets that they would have retrieved in those searches. So once staff find assets, it's really typical that they want to know things like, well, what am I looking at? Or listening to, for that matter. What's going on in this picture? I found a bunch of things. Which one should I use? Is one or the other one of these things preferred for publication? Or I love it, can I use it? Can I use it on the web? Can I use it in a publication? Or are there any restrictions on its use? So we're trying to answer questions like that about assets through data, of course, in the digital asset management system. So for example, we're trying to answer that question of, can I use it? With a corresponding field in the digital asset management system that's called Can SFMOMA use it? And that field has values or answers like it's okay for public use or you must clear promotional use. So does having the right dam in our situation make a difference? One of the key objectives for our second digital asset management system was to increase usership, and so you're going to hear me say this a lot. Increase usership is kind of that's the main goal, to increase usership of the dam. With our first dam, we had very modest, I would say static usership, and with dam number 2, we want to increase the number of staff that are going to the digital asset management system to find assets, and we also want to increase the number of staff who are going to the system to add their assets. So our aspiration is that if you get an asset, whether from an outside source like an artist studio, for example, or if you take a picture or if you make a video, then you should contribute your asset to the digital asset management system or what you know about the asset to the digital asset management system. So this approach around our approach is to have distributed contributors, right? And that's been a really, really tough nut to crack. Because today, not all staff with something to add are contributing routinely. So what happens there is that we have gaps. We have gaps in our commonly held documentation around artworks, around artists, around our programs, because not all within scope assets and data are routinely making it into our common tools, like our digital asset management system or our collections management system for that matter. So why aren't more staff contributing to the digital asset management system? And I'm going to give a laundry list of things that we've heard in the past about why staff aren't contributing what they have or what they know about the assets. And we certainly use the things that we've heard in the past to develop our second digital asset management system. One thing we've heard, one concern, is that that I don't like the tool, that they don't like the system. And some people felt that our first digital asset management system was too clunky, for example. Another thing that we've heard is that I don't have time to learn a new process. Another thing that we've heard is that my content doesn't belong there. So, for example, that might be because a staff member feels their content is sensitive or it's ephemeral and maybe it shouldn't go into a system. We've also heard that the system doesn't fully support what's needed for my content. So that might be functionality or it might be data. So we hear that a lot with video, for example. And then another thing we've heard in the past is that the digital asset management system actually doesn't have the content that I need for my work. So on this last point about the content, the system doesn't have the content that I need, one of the things that we've tried to do with implementing our second dam is to align what we're doing with the dam, the content, with our hottest programming, right? So in other words, to ready the dam with the content that staff is working on right now, or that they might be working on in the next few months, for example. But in order to kind of achieve that hot programming idea, to get assets into the system in a timely manner, our dams team is in fact adding assets to the system on behalf of others. Now that is not our aspiration. Our aspiration is to have a distributed contributors, right? So we're trying to use a mix of things to try to increase those contributors around the museum. So a couple of things. Maybe a really easy thing that we've been doing is almost around branding. So we don't call our second dam by its product name. We call it the Digital Garden. We call it the Digital Garden in order to signal that it's an active, living space and that it's a pleasant experience. So, who laughed? No. We also hired our first full-time asset manager. So now the dam, I feel, is starting to get the attention that it really deserves, right? So the other thing, I should tell you that what our team, who's on the team. The garden team is the full-time asset manager, a full-time associate, and then it has my all-out attention a lot. So in implementing the garden, I should say that we also instituted, I guess, a lead team, and the lead team helps us guide the garden's progress. And the lead team is comprised of key stakeholders, of course, and that includes folks from our IT department, folks from collections and marketing, and our digital engagement team as well. So what are we doing around other things we're thinking about around how do we increase the number of contributors? We think we're going to see more and different content come into the garden if we address the like it factor, right? So one of the things that we're also thinking about doing is we can increase contributions if we can make it simple to use. And we can also increase content, we believe, if we can increase contributions if we can align it with our program. Very, very simple things. So on the liking it factor, we picked dam number 2 because of its favorable, of course, because of its favorable ratings among staff. That we had a lot of staff engaged in this process. And really importantly, another reason why we picked dam number 2 is because we felt that the vendor would make a really great partner for SF MoMA in terms of what we wanted to do. And this has proven to be the case. So also, and in terms of partners, our IT and our web team, of course, are really, really principal partners in this endeavor. And with our new website, for example, it's becoming the case that if a staff member wants to have an asset, an image, or any other kind of asset, make its way onto the web, then it first needs to be in the digital garden. So that's a really great incentive for increasing contributions. We think we can increase usership in the garden, as I said, we think we can increase usership, and in this sense I'm meaning contributions in the garden, if we make it as simple as possible to use. And that's true. We want that to be true for both staff that are looking for assets and, again, for staff that have data or assets to contribute. So on the data, I keep referring to assets and data. I mean, you may not have contributed an asset, but maybe you have something to tell us about that asset. So go ahead and tell us about that asset through data. So we apply in our work in developing the second dam, we've applied this Make It Simple filter wherever we can. So we apply this Make It Simple filter when we actually talk about the digital garden, when we design our user guidelines for the digital garden, and when we develop workflows with staff around making their contributions. So this is kind of getting at the lessons learned bit, but when I think about those workflows, one of the things that I think about is, well, what are we asking contributors to do? Are there too many fields? Too many steps? Are there too many things to remember? Is it harder for the infrequent contributor to contribute? I also think about what really matters to staff, what really matters to users. And I try to understand, I'm trying to understand what really matters. Thank you. I see someone got that coffee, right? All right. I try to understand what really, really matters, because while we're trying to make it simple for users, making it simple is actually very impactful for managers, right? So making it simple for others has been very impactful for us. So how do you know what really matters to users? Well, we try to stay alert to opportunities for how the digital garden can support our work. So for example, how can the garden support our work with artists, as an example? We pay attention to how staff are using the digital garden, or maybe not using it, but they could be using it in certain ways. An example here is that we look at the weekly search logs to see how staff are searching the system and using it in practice. We're also looking at the search logs to spot trends and to understand where the gaps in content might be. We're also doing some benchmarking to understand if we, the garden team, and the garden itself are in fact making a difference. So things like, well, is it true that the digital garden is simple to use, simpler to use than the former, the first digital asset management system? Is it true that the content's aligning with our program? Is it true that usership is increasing? And in fact, with our second dam, we are seeing usership, at least for people searching. It's going up, and it's going up moderately for people that are contributing, which is great. I think this is really fabulous for me to see this. You can kind of see we rolled it out in January, and this is where we had our piloteers. So, you know, 71, no, this is May. I skipped over in January, excuse me. So May, we had 71 users about midstream, and then in October, we've roughly, what is that? Someone who's good at math. Not quite doubled, we quartered, or no, I don't know. Thank you, yes. All right. So why this increase? Well, some of it I hope it's because the digital garden is a more pleasant experience. And I hope we're making it more simple than the former digital asset management system. We're also making personal appeals around the museum for folks to contribute, to participate. And we're actively promoting what's being contributed in the garden. And people, this is through like weekly kind of like promotional messages around what's new in the garden. And people like to get a kick out of seeing the content that they've contributed being promoted throughout the museum. But we still have gaps in our commonly held documentation around artists and artworks in our programs, because not all of that documentation is in fact making it into the dams. So Danny asked us to consider what museums should be doing to help build dams for museums. And if you haven't gotten it already, then from my hammering on the usership, one of the things that I would love to hear from everyone is ideas around increasing and sustaining participation in the digital asset management system. Not only folks that are going to the system to find things, but also actively contributing their stuff. So does having a dam make a difference? Well, for us, it's definitely a work in progress, but that work in progress always has as its core, we want it to inspire us to add, to explore, and to use assets. So that's it. Thank you. Ooh, blow for that.
So now that we've all talked about our experiences, I have not implemented a dams. I have only gone out and sought information from people who have. I've worked on them, and finding that information has been mind-blowing. And as you can see, all three panelists have three very separate realities that they're dealing with, and everyone knows eventually they're going to have to update their dams because technology is just moving so quickly. Who would like to start off with some questions for our panelists? Go right ahead.
No vendor was named in this presentation.
Wait,
Could we
Piction.
have names?
Piction. Mine is Piction.
Yes, Piction, I'm sorry. Sorry.
Luna Insight. And we're using net exposure.
Okay, good, thank you.
Go ahead, Piran.
Could you guys talk a little bit about the various treasure boxes that staff like to hold on to and how you have managed to maybe open those up?
Or not.
Or
As
not?
you say, we have not managed to open those up. There was actually I have one conversation I've had with one of the institutions was, unless we're distributed around a park. I mean, it's fairly the museums are pretty close together, but you know you kind of have to step outside to get to my office from the museums. And one institution in particular said they weren't going to do any more digitizing unless we would put a rig in their institution. So part of the model that we have is this kind of distributed, leverage the economy of scale, centralize things. So we were planning on setting up a rig, centrally and bringing assets over, even archive assets. But they're like, nope, not going to happen.
Actually, to add to that, I think it's not so much the treasure boxes that people are hesitant to share as the closets, the messy closets. So, if somebody has something that's well organized, I'm thinking about our conservation images. They had 25,000 images, and it was like, hey, let's bring these into the dams. They were perfectly ready they were ready to go. They didn't need any tweaking. I'm talking to the guy that does most of the video around the building. I still haven't gotten my hands on that stuff, and I'm pretty sure it's because on the network he's just got them all in one big folder with all the outtakes and everything. So I think that's an issue that people need to deal with.
I was just going to say one more thing. So I've just come out of this project to inventory all the part collections, which is what those numbers that you saw, and half, without exception, every institution, after 2 hours of focused questioning with a light in their face, they all said, we don't actually know what we have. And so one of the first things, so that's been a focus for me, and I'll just share with you one of the frameworks that we're looking at. One of the companies is called Digital Arc, and they have this rapid capture iPad-based documentation system where you just go into one of those closets where they don't even know what it is. You set it up with a kind of format for accession numbers, and you just kind of crank through these things, take a picture, and it centralizes it in it's a cloud-based service, centralizes it in a database, and then at some point you just take it out and put it into whatever collections management system you're using.
Yeah, I mean, just quickly, I think, at SF MoMA, it's understood and it's embraced to share. I think this is there's not a, I don't want to say there's not a, I don't want to call it a battle, but that's not an issue. I think the issue is more the process. Yeah, I think it's more like kind of those points that I made around, I don't have time, how do I make time? So it's getting it into the flow. So I think that's mostly the biggest hurdle there.
Go ahead then, Mike.
My question is, do you find your staff are using your dams as collaborative workspaces, or do people just park finished products into your dams for archiving purposes, or are you having success having people share living audio, video, images, members magazines? Have you had any luck getting people to collaborate in a dam?
I can give a thumbs up.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think one of the really brilliant things that we saw with the website redesign was, in fact, just that. And so over the last 3 months, I would say, we've definitely seen the dam become almost a rival to, if not start to replace the shared drives on like a network, right? So people are going to the dam and using the collaborative tools there to in fact do just what you've said. So I think within the last, like I said, the last 3 months, that was not the case with the first dam, but it has been the case with this one.
And I think that probably should be one of the checkoffs on when you're evaluating dams, is what kind of collaborative tools are available. And it also falls under that training that one of you said, because new people won't know where to do that, and they'll do it in the easiest place that they can find.
Mike, and then.
Hi, I'm interested in the staffing, and I think Layna, you mentioned you have two people dedicated to the dams. Nick and Deborah, do you each have dedicated staff for dams?
No, I'm the official database nerd. I'm the administrative, the program administrator. Tech support takes care of the network stuff, and we have one person whose title is digital imaging archivist, who does data and image loads as well as scanning.
Okay. And just follow, Layna, was it always the case that you had full-time staff?
No.
Could you talk about the difference between managing it without full-time dedicated staff and with?
Wow. The word I've been using a lot in the last 2 years is epic, and so it's been really epic and very overwhelming. I think Nick used the word overwhelming, and we hired someone who had really deep expertise in this area too. And so that has made a really significant difference. And, I don't know whether, is David Heald in the audience from Guggenheim? He and I had a talk about when I was looking for someone for this position, and I think he may have been looking as well. He used the word charisma. Like, you want to find someone that has charisma. And it's so interesting because you have someone that can kind of like, okay, let's go, you know. And so I think that's definitely made a difference. I think that means that I have no charisma. I think that's what's happening. Yeah, but it's like night and day, really.
Okay.
Yeah.
Go ahead, and then we'll go to the back.
Question about APIs. If I'm trying to pick a vendor, do I have to set aside money to have external firms write APIs to TMS and the OSCE project and my website and the mobile app? Or can I expect the vendors to provide all of those APIs for me?
I mean, anybody, if you're going to pay someone, anybody will do that for you. Piction has APIs for Past Perfect and Embark. I believe they also have one for TMS. I mean, the way these things don't come out of the box. I was talking about frameworks, and that's exactly what those things are. So there's some core, asset management functionality, and then you layer on a transformation layer, and then you want APIs. You have to go to you don't just check the box and say, yeah, connect to Past Perfect. So somebody's going to have to build that for you. Presumably now those vendors have the tools, the APIs in place that they tweak it for your particular implementation. But yeah, it's not something that comes out of the box.
Go ahead and back.
Andrew Lewis from Layna. I've got a question about how you deliver the assets. So clearly you're trying to get all your disparate databases into one sort of harmonized format and do everything in the same way for all the stuff. At the deal with managing the front end and delivering it. And have you sort of scoped what happens to it when you need to send it off to like Medium or YouTube or all these sort of front end places? I mean, it's similar to the API question, but so on a website, one of the things that you want to do is have a nice content delivery network that goes around the world and things. And some of those are dams in themselves. But,
Mhm.
if you talk about news networks, they use dams and those things easily to change it. So, what do you think of that?
So we have at our setup, so that Piction front end, part of what it's doing, it's literally looking at a file structure, and that's where the images are, and it's like a PHP front end. But there are some APIs there that are sending off to Flickr and YouTube. So those things can be built in. It's kind of like a transactional engine going on, deploying those things up.
Is that part of the picture of that?
It was a custom development. Yeah, I mean, you have to be prepared for custom. It's kind of like collections management. Bizarrely, it's like collections management systems. Weren't built for access. They were built for management. So everybody spends all this time trying to figure out how to, suck this stuff out and present it. Actually, digital asset management systems are the same thing. They're management systems. I think the one I'll name one system just because I'm trying to keep track of what's going on. Net exposure seems like it's got this really interesting kind of HTML5 layer over their kind of core infrastructure, which seems like it's doing a really interesting. It seems like it's a dam that has thought about access as a primary requisite. And I don't know if you guys have any more detail.
Well, I
on
would
that.
just say that one of the things you might want to look for in a vendor is a vendor that will, yes, if you want something custom, yes, they'll develop it for you, but the idea being, let's work together as a community, so if they develop something for you, then it becomes available for the next customer. So that's a question we all should be asking. Well, if I pay you this money to do this, are you going to make it available to my colleagues down the road? And I think good vendors are doing that.
I mean, conversely, you look from you were talking about this morning, looking at the users need, so the developers need things in JSON, structured data like that, so we would sort of more look like developing something that just spits anything out in JSON as long as you can configure it, and then pretty much any developer's going to sort of show you development scope of this flat XML file that we're talking about, and all the other things that generate data.
Go ahead.
An observation, having worked with this for a while. The problem might not be the right word, but the issue with implementing a DAMS is it exposes every problem you have with your files and your metadata. Everything.
Oh, yeah.
And you will see, everything you could possibly imagine when you've actually undertaken the process to migrate content into the dams.
And that's the biggest complaint in Balboa Park is that the institutions can't find their stuff in the commons, and it's like, you know, I can't search for this stuff. It's like, well, you never put any metadata on it. So how do you expect that to work? I mean, just a complete disconnect, which
Or the metadata isn't any good.
both those things are true.
Go ahead.
I have a comment, maybe more than a question, which is just that depending on the size of the institution, one thing that I think anyone shopping for a dam needs to consider is the level of IT support that's available within the institution, the level of expertise, and that might lead toward a decision whether or not to host it internally or to go to an externally hosted solution, which is in many cases much easier to support than others.
Yeah, there's kind of new dams that are coming online. They give you an option, you know, host it yourself, or you know, we'll host it for you. It seems like that's a trend now.
Any other questions or comments? Go right ahead.
What costs do you see with like implementing and then ongoing operations? Just ballpark. Just something if I were to write a budget line for it.
Are you including staff costs as well?
No,
Just like licensing?
yeah,
I mean, licensing is going to be, you know, depending on the number of assets, it's going to be in the tens of thousands a year. But, you know, that's why I was talking about the total cost of ownership. You know, you got to be thinking of hundreds of thousands to put something in. Yeah.
But you're
Yeah.
also going to find huge disparities in pricing structures from vendor to vendor, and it's not always transparent. So you almost have to at least have an initial conversation with a vendor to say, you know, and push them to say, can you give me a ballpark of, you know, what it's going to cost, at least for the sort of upfront costs of getting it up and running, and what's the annual maintenance.
Ask them to talk to one of their current clients, to ask them how they like it. That was the number one thing most of my interviewees said. If they had known, if they didn't do it, they wish they had. And if they had known and they did do it, they got the honest answers from a client. So that's another option when you're talking to your vendor. That seemed to be very, like, spot on.
I was just going to make a quick comment, sorry. And that is, I think, Nick, you used the word operationalize. I think that's the word you paused on for a few minutes, if I'm not mistaken.
So make an impression on us.
Yeah,
We know what we're
tears
doing.
were coming.
And one of the barriers that we faced a few years ago was having to demonstrate and to define the need and to talk about how we needed the dam. And so that's happily no longer the case. The case has been made, and so it's operationalized, right? So our budget routinely includes the baseline for what we need. We need more, even though it may sound like we're really just swimming in it. You know, we've got 2 full-time staff members, and it's like, woohoo! But I certainly don't take that for granted either, that, you know, that because now it's accepted, I don't take that for granted. So I'm always looking for opportunities to demonstrate its value. But I think that's an interesting point. That was a hurdle for us a few years ago, but it's no longer the case.
A question for you, Danielle.
Yep.
In your research and work on this, have you discovered, do you have any stories as far as organizations that have been working with the dam and then the vendor goes bust and they're really...
Yeah. Deb, everyone on the panel I interviewed and is in my thesis one way or another. And then additionally, there are 11 other people. Everyone has had an issue whether they bust with the vendor or not. You're going to have some headbutting. You're going to be working with them for a long time. Once you sign a contract, make sure you like them. That is the number one thing. Make sure that they're actually listening to you. And if it goes bust, I think Deb said it the best, take those lemons and make some lemonade. Set yourself up so when you do get another vendor in line, you're ready to start putting things into that dams. I mean, it sounded horrific, but you turned
And
it.
I didn't get fired.
you know, you're working with outside vendors, double, triple check.
I guess my question then goes to, I mean, you had talked about open source. source, but a little dismissively. And like a free puppy, which I agree with you, it's not, open source is, one of the assets is not free, it's a lower entry level. But one of the strengths is, and was brought up here, is that is cost sharing. So if you know, if San Francisco MoMA spends $40,000 on an aspect that gets built into an open source application, the other institutions benefit from it. And if the organization that is managing that open source application gets greedy or goes bust, that the application is still there to be picked up.
So
talk about it being mission critical.
So my problem with open source is actually it's not with the problem with open source, it's the problem with the perception of open source. So, you know, museum leadership say, well, it's open source, must be free, so why do you want 300,000 to, you know, kit out? That's the problem.
Right.
But there's you know, some of those open source implementations are much more robust.
Yeah. I mean, the Minnesota Historical Society uses Flux, which
Right.
is a grant management system, and it's phenomenal. And the program is free, but,
Right.
but it's managed by the corporation Flux, and it's phenomenal. It strikes me that a lot of these things, especially with mission critical assets, open source is probably like a tortoise and the hare, where it's the tortoise is sort of the slower to development, but probably in the longer it does probably
You're probably right.
do very well.
But I think also one of the issues with either open source or build it yourself databases is that you often have one person or one contract person who develops that database, and if that person leaves, all of that knowledge may go with them. So that at least when you're using something from a vendor, that vendor still has the baseline.
That's actually not true.
Well, I could give you a
Fast
couple of
Perfect is
examples.
the same way where they're retiring right now, and there goes the knowledge. It doesn't matter if it's open source or private. You have the same problem.
I think what you have to remember with museums is that unlike the corporate companies that dams were originally built for, we can't just throw money at these problems. So you need to think long term about it so that you save yourself money longer. So open source might be right for some places and it may not be for others. And the whole idea is to just research, talk to people, get feedback, do sandboxes in your institution with your staff, testing it out and giving you feedback. The more you research, you're going to find that sweet spot eventually.
So I'm a vendor, but not a dam vendor. But one thing that I think that you guys, as well as the museum world and myself, any world, is keep things simple. You know, get the core things in your vendor product right, like the 80% thing. I've always said that is just it. You know, the bells and whistles are the things that are going to trip you up, and the remote control thing. You don't use 60% of the buttons. That to me is one of the biggest takeaways here. Get the core things right, especially the relationship with people, and it'll go a long way.
I have one final thought. I know
Yeah.
we're ramping up, and I just want to reiterate, I think it was you said about this forces some really hard questions in your institution, and if you'll indulge me, I want to share a quote that I came up with, which is embracing Donald Rumsfeld when it comes to digitization. We have known knowns, collection objects we have digitized. We have known unknowns, collection objects we haven't yet digitized. There are also unknown unknowns, collection objects we don't know we have. There is a fourth kind, unknown knowns, collection objects which we intentionally refuse to acknowledge are worth digitizing. And I'll drop the mic. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone. We appreciate you coming out.